So Ray Dalio takes a very economic view of the world, and he's like, oh, hey, by the way, what he calls the big cycle is so predictable that he broke it down into 6 phases, and every empire has gone through these 6 phases. They last for roughly like 100 to 150 years. America's basically at the end of the 100-year cycle. And phase 6 is total collapse, war, basically. And the old world order falls apart. There's usually a violent war, and then a new world order is established. And we're like clockwork on the cycle from a money perspective, from a division perspective, like everything just lines up. So you have to have an internal populace that is divided. You need to get yourself over your skis from a debt perspective, which we've done. You have to start printing money like crazy. And there has to be a new superpower on the rise. Like it's the stage is set. And the stage was set in World War II, which is how we became the dominant power. To your point about waking a sleeping dragon. Sleeping dragon woke up, but now we're in trouble. So that's my overly simplistic view of why this worked. It was sort of a fluke, not a fluke, but it was we hit the cycle at just the right moment when the British Empire collapsed at the end of World War II. Because of our geography, we weren't destroyed by bombs. So we come out of the war pretty much unscathed. So we ramp up all of our production capabilities. We absolutely crush it. We help win. We create the nuclear bomb. Just a lot of things come together. And so then we're established as the world reserve currency. Because it's not like we weren't divided before then, but we got to really enjoy a hot minute of prosperity. Does that seem like the right breakdown of why we could overcome our differences previously and now we can't? Like, how do you...
Yeah, I don't think it's wrong. I don't think it's wrong at all. I think that it's interesting to me because it sounds like Ray Dalio, one of the reasons you respect him so much is because his analysis is based in economics.
And he's put his money where his mouth is.
Economics and economists have long been viewed as the true predictors of future prosperity. At CIA, we lean heavily into economic studies. Economic experts, economic analysis, the law of economics, because the law of economics is that of the law of scarcity. One of the first and most underrated economists out there was actually a Soviet economist, a guy named Kondratiev. Kondratiev created what's known as the Kondratiev wave, the Kondratiev cycle. That cycle essentially puts us, it explains the pattern of interstate conflict or intrastate conflict, where countries compete, actually go to war with each other. And it puts it on about a 25-year cycle. 25 years to a peak in conflict, 25 years to a drop in conflict. And then as the wave continues, like most waves, the actual peak of the waves expands. So it goes from being 25 years to 25 years to then 32 years to 32 years. And you start to see this longer, slower wave, right? But it's still a wave, form. The next peak of conflict, according to Kondratiev's wave, against the United States' point of view, happens in about 2024, 2025.
Oh, great.
So we now have multiple economists basically saying that there's a peak coming, a peak of conflict coming. And that conflict for the Kondratiev wave is a peak of popular conflict and unpopular conflict. So we're coming off of an unpopular conflict, right? Afghanistan and Iraq largely turned into an unpopular conflict at the end, right? And the wave between when that started and when the next wave is coming is right in that 25-year mark, right? So according to Kondratiev, we are not only coming up on a period of conflict, but it will be popular inside the United States. So people will rally behind that conflict. That doesn't mean we're going to win. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be in our best interest, but it does mean, to your point earlier, that we might see that moment where everybody kind of comes together again. I think part of the reason that we were able to be successful was because of the same rules of economics that you laid out from World War II. Our country, hugely unpopular. Western expansion was hugely unpopular at the time. The Civil War, nobody wants to see the Civil War again. Most people would say the Civil War was a traumatic and horrible, loss of life. At the time, there was no other option. Abraham Lincoln had no option except to pursue civil war because he knew that the presidents before him had been working to create a single solitary nation that had national security from coast to coast. We can say it was a fight for states' rights. We can say it was a fight for slavery. We can say it was a fight for lots of things. And those are also true, but they may not be the number one reason why the Civil War was so important. The Civil War was so important because we needed to remain one unified country from coast to coast to have American primacy in the long run. American primacy is a concept that was created by Alexander Hamilton.
Really?
American primacy is not new. There's an entire society out there called the Alexander Hamilton Society that's focused on preserving the ideals of Alexander Hamilton and the founding fathers, who all believed that a strong United States meant a strong world because they saw and lived through the oppression of living under a monarchy, right? If you look at the top 5 wealthiest countries in the world right now, the top 5 wealthiest countries in the world, 2 of them are democracies. The other 3 are monarchies, right? So the idea that democracy is the solution to all wealth and success hasn't really been proven yet. We're still outnumbered by monarchies, right? So what does the future hold? The future will be conflict is coming. Multiple economists have pointed to it. You can see the writing on the wall, what my wife and I call the writing on the wall. Conflict is coming. What will that conflict look like is the bigger question. You talked earlier about how, you and I might be of the same ilk when it comes to, are we already engaged in World War III? Is World War III coming up? What will that World War look like? There is conflict coming. There is no reason for us to think it will look like it looked in World War II. If anything, conflict has proven to us that it evolves and changes just like technology and just like human thinking, right? But it's still predictable because it takes human beings to wage war. I don't think I'm answering your question very well here, but this is where my brain goes.
Stage. So my question is, do you see this as a conflict with China? Does it become open warfare? Is this going to be over Taiwan? Or the Russia-Ukraine thing spills over into something? How do you see this playing out?
So my honest anticipation, what I expect will happen, is that China will make a legal move on Taiwan. What China did in Hong Kong was legal first. They changed the laws in Hong Kong. They changed the laws in China, which then changed the laws in Hong Kong, which made it legal for them to go in and take Hong Kong by force. In 2019, right before COVID hit, the whole world watched, and it happened. And the whole world complained and threw a fit and leveraged sanctions and said it was unfair and unjust and everything else. And then the Chinese did it anyways. And now here it is 2023, and most people don't even remember what happened in Hong Kong just 4 years ago. Now they're watching what's happening in Ukraine. Now in Ukraine, some people say that what happened in Ukraine is that the world rallied behind Ukraine by giving them weapons and giving them training and giving them resources. The most limited resource in Ukraine is Ukrainian soldiers. It's not tanks or guns or howitzers. The thing that will run out first is Ukrainian fighters. That's it's a shame to me to watch what's happening because the Ukrainian fighting force is putting up such a valiant fight. They're doing everything they possibly can to equip every warfighter to be worth 10, 20, 30, 50 Russian fighters, right? But that's their most limited resource. They're not going to be able to create more Russian fighters in the next 3 to 5 years. You can't turn a 5-year-old into an 18-year-old. So that's the resource. That's the clock that Zelensky knows he's fighting against, that he's racing against, is not a clock of fighter jets or missile defense systems. It's how am I going to find enough fighters? And NATO and the West know that they don't want to put their boots in Ukraine fighting the Russians, because that's all it would take for the Russians to basically say, hey, NATO allies are killing Russians, so now Russia can kill NATO allies. And because Russia is a nuclear power, they essentially have the same the same trump card that we had in World War II. So nobody in NATO wants to mess with that trump card, because when you have an animal cornered, it does amazing things, right? So what I see happening is China will make a legal move on Taiwan.
What legal play do they have with Taiwan, though?
They have a number of legal plays. First of all, do you know what the official American stance is on Taiwan?
It's something like we're not going to do anything, but don't like touch them. It's so like bizarrely vague.
Yeah, it's called the one China, two systems policy. Essentially, in the eyes of American policy, Taiwan already belongs to China.
Interesting.
So then China also has acknowledged with Taiwan, you have your own system, but you're still part of the mother country.
This is Hong Kong 2.0.
Hong Kong 2.0. And over the stretch of 80 miles from coast to coast between southeastern China and Taiwan. So it's sticky, man. If China makes a legislative move that basically forces the Taiwanese system to then say, you are now communist, right? They could have the legal foundation to do that. And then a legal attack is very similar to what they did in Hong Kong. That goes to court systems. That doesn't go to bullets, right? And then when the legal system starts to go in their best interest or in their favor, now China has legal grounds to basically have Chinese police officers enforce Chinese law inside Taiwan. This whole process, what the hell is the United States going to do? There's no missiles, there's no guns. You can drive through the straits all you want. It's a legal issue. It's not a military issue. So I anticipate China making a legal move on Taiwan that will be supported by key members in the UN. Why? Because how many of the BRICS are in the leading countries in the UN? All of them, right? If you look at the Ukrainian conflict now, the news media oversimplifies everything. So media says that the UN passes resolutions that condemn Russia. That's true. And the UN passes resolutions with a large majority. 140 countries, condemn Russia. That is also true. What they're not telling you is that the countries who are not condemning Russia are the largest, wealthiest countries in the UN. China is not condemning Russia. South Africa is not condemning Russia. India is not condemning Russia, right? Even inside NATO, you have Belgium and Hungary who are not condemning Russia.
Really?
So even NATO is not unified on this.
Whoa.
Right? China's seeing all of this, and China's seeing it for what it really is, not for what American media is telling the American people it is. And the American media isn't, they're not trying to lead us astray. They're just trying to run a business. They're trying to get people to read their newspaper, click their links, see their ads so that they can pay their employees the next pay cycle. It's all media is trying to do. They're not trying to lead us down the wrong path. So once there's an administrative takeover in Taiwan, China has all the rules that all the cover it needs to basically start shipping National Guard troops, police officers, even military units over to Taiwan. And now Taiwan belongs to China in a bloodless war, very similar to the bloodless coups that we've seen multiple times in places like Thailand or all over Southeast Asia, right? That's how I see it happening. And I see it largely happening in the lead up to the 2024 election because China is going to benefit from a very confused American base.
It will be peak division.
During peak division and electoral cycle.
Wow. That's so distressing because that feels very plausible. Okay, so we have a lot of business interests there. So what will our reaction be? Because my first thought was our reaction will be, oh, maybe that's the best way for this to happen. We can be like, we don't have to go and commit our American lives to it. They did it just like just like Hong Kong, where we'll, rant and rave and say this is a problem and how dare you and sanctions. Yep. But ultimately be glad that we're not sending people to die. But do we have enough business interests there that, especially in sensitive areas like chip manufacturing, where we can't let it go?
Our business interests with China are significantly bigger than our business interests with Taiwan.
Wow.
Taiwan has the market cornered on semiconductors, but that's not just for the United States. They have the market. They have like 98% of the market share in semiconductor manufacturing. Who designs the semiconductors? We do. We have all the IP. They just have the plants. That's why one of the big initiatives in Biden's CHIP Act is to actually bring TSMC, I forget the name of the country, or I forget the name of the company, the main manufacturer in Taiwan, to actually bring them to the United States. So they're trying to build manufacturing plants for the Taiwanese company here in the flyover states in the United States so that we can just bring that tool.
God, this is going to be a fascinating
stateside.
10 to 20 year period.
Absolutely. You just nailed it right there. it is going to be a fascinating decade to 2 decades in the future. So that's what I want to focus on. That's what I encourage my clients to focus on. It's not about what happens now or in the next 2 years. It's about what are you going to do so that your family, your business, your financial legacy, your individual legacy is safeguarded for what the world could look like 10 to 20 years from now. The world could look like the United States is still the economic and military superpower. It could look like that. So you may not have to change much. But according to economists, by 2033, China will be the economic superpower. That's not far away.
If we print money like crazy, then we could not go to zero, but like every other superpower before us, you really get knocked for 6. It is not a minor thing that happens.
Right.
And then you lose your ability to print your way out of things, which then you go into austerity. Now you look like England post-World War II, which, hey, England's amazing, but they definitely had some rough years, and they're certainly not the global superpower that we are now. But I've sort of always imagined us falling into the number 2 position where we still maintain some real might, that we have massive influence in other parts of the world, that there will almost certainly be parts like Europe, and look, they're an economic mess, but parts like Europe that are going to be far more aligned, most likely, certainly culturally, with America than they would be with China. And so you get sort of a more like Cold War-y vibe where Russia was a huge player. For anybody that's too young to remember, Russia was a beast when I was a kid. Now, we didn't know that it was a bit of a paper tiger, but like they really, they mattered on the global stage, and I imagine will still matter.
I think you're asking yourself the right questions, right? Knowing that humans are laughably predictable, if China becomes the next global superpower, what is the laughably predictable thing that would happen next, right? The most predictable outcome is that China would take the number 1 spot. We would fall to the number 2 spot. Who's always everyone's target? The guy in the lead. So right now, the world is unified that the United States is enemy number 1. Even if there are allies, we're still enemy number 1. You think NATO likes the United States? No. France and Germany have both come out to say that they don't want the United States in NATO anymore.
What?
Absolutely. The Chancellor of Germany has said he wants Germany to have the largest army in Europe, specifically so that they can't be bossed around anymore by the United States because everybody's overdependent on the United States military. Right? The president of France, early in the invasion with Ukraine, shut Biden down and said, you are exacerbating this conflict with the rhetoric that you're spitting in Poland and the United States, when you don't even have, the United States isn't even within the firing range of Russia. Right? So France and Germany have had something to say. Biden has been so successful with his policy in Poland because Poland has long had history against Russia. So it's a natural way in. Poland already hates Russia, and Poland will take any help it can get from anybody in NATO. And so the United States comes in and says, hey, we'll help you, Poland. We'll back you up, and Poland backs the United States up. But Canada and France and Russia and Germany and the UK, they have a very different story there.
Whoa. We have to talk about France. So I was scandalized in my research to hear you say that when you think about like the most hardcore intelligence agencies, that France, of all places, is like brutal. The DSGE, DGSE.
DGSE, yep.
What's their shtick? Why France?
So there's a couple reasons why France. So one of the biggest reasons why France is because in the late 90s, the United States CIA was caught spying on the French government. Just like in the early 2010s, we were caught spying on the German government, right? Unlike Germany, France holds a grudge. So
is France not spying on us?
Of course they are.
Yeah,
of course they are.
So, but it's like we got caught, and so now they get to be mad?
No, it's more like something changed. Prior to the 90s, prior to the late 90s, France wasn't so interested in the United States. They were interested in more direct threats to France. Well, now in the late 90s, there's this giant flap inside France, and now France is like, fuck the Americans, right? So they start to dedicate resources to building up an intelligence service and a skill set that makes sure that they will never be penetrated by the Americans again. right, the DGSE, becomes one of the, and still remains, one of the best funded, most technically capable intelligence services in the world.
That's crazy.
Why does France have enough money to put all of their resources into their intelligence operations? Because guess what they don't have to worry about? Military industrial complex, because they're part of NATO, and the United States wants to keep sending weapons and troops into the European countries. So the United States has basically bought its influence in NATO by forcing Europe to prioritize, or giving Europe the opportunity to prioritize their economic growth in other avenues besides military industrial development. That's why most of the militaries in Europe are very weak and very small. Now, there are some that are modernized, which is why everybody's so excited about Sweden and Finland coming into NATO. But most other countries are outdated and underfunded. And they don't need to be funded, because if something happens in Poland, Article 5 of the NATO alliance means that the United States military is going to come save the day. So they're okay with that. And of course, the United States is okay with that too, because it means there's never going to be a military competitor in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. As a result, what does get to happen is those countries can take all the money that they would spend on military defense and channel it into intelligence operations. Now, when they channel it into intelligence operations against China, North Korea, Iran, terrorism, they share that information back and forth with the United States selectively, and they build that alliance. But they also spend those resources spying against the United States.
That's so funny.
And because France specifically is so well funded and holds a grudge and is so adept specifically at targeting Americans, they have made a huge impact in the space of economic and industrial espionage against the United States. There are, if you talk to an intelligence professional, like I'm sure you have friends in your network, and you're like, hey, is France really that big a deal? You will hear the same thing over and over again. Fuck France.
Wow.
You will hear those two words from every intelligence professional out there, because we have all been bested at some point in time by the DGSE. They either stumbled into one of our cases, they false flagged and pretended to be CIA and recruited an asset from underneath us, or who knows what, right? But they know how to target Americans.
Whoa.
And nobody knows they even exist. It's the perfect kind of clandestine operation. Nobody even knows the threat is there.
We live in a rapidly changing, often chaotic world, and there's so much breaking news that it's honestly hard to keep track of it all. But you can stay current on all the latest and breaking news with a balanced perspective with Ground News. Ground News compiles articles from 50,000 plus news sources across every angle, giving you the full picture, even on controversial topics like the Middle East or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And with Ground News, you have the ability to easily compare all the different headlines across a bunch of different outlets, the blind spots of the outlets, the biases in the coverage, so you can form your own opinions and not be tricked or swayed by the media into believing something from an angle that isn't necessarily true. So if you are tired of feeling like you're being yanked around and manipulated, give Ground News a try. Go to ground.news/Tom and you can get 40% off unlimited access this month. That's ground.news/Tom, or click the link below.
The way that information warfare works, leveraging the human animal against itself, I am waking up to a reality that I've been so focused in my life on my businesses and my loves and passions and my wife, oh my God, that I'm totally blind to all this. And that I have an outdated vision. Like, I think of France from the 80s and 90s when I was a kid, and like
we all made fun of them. They put their hands up.
Exactly.
They don't even fight back.
100%.
Yeah.
And so my vision, I'm sure, on a lot of these countries is really skewed in terms of what they actually think about us. Because I remember there was a lot of that grumbling when the World Trade Center first, not 9/11, but in the 90s.
Yeah.
When they first bombed it, where it was like, there are people in the world that hate Americans. I was like, say what? Like, I had completely, my own sort of insulated vision of America, and just we export culture and America's so great. And
who wouldn't love democracy?
Yeah. That was the first time where I was like, whoa, wait a second. Like, people don't actually want this. And that is, so in recent years, I've been reading a lot about totalitarian states, communism, and like what that really looks like in practice. And it gets real scary real fast. And so looking at Mao's China, which is like anybody that wants to have their brain absolutely melted, there are 3 books that I recommend that you read where you can see just how terrifying humans can be. And that is Mao, The Unknown Story, The Untold Story. I can never remember the exact, but that. The Gulag Archipelago, about the Gulag system in Russia. And then The Red Famine, which is about the Ukrainian famine. Those 3 books will show you the depths of human evil. Like, I don't know how to, like, it, that's really, really unbelievable, like what went down. And then when I was thinking about China, and it's like, but ultimately, like, that is born of the people. Yeah. Like that is the natural outcropping. Now look, it may come and go, and maybe it's just born of the people right now in this moment, and maybe that, won't last, but like it is the system that they don't overthrow. That would be the right way to say it, because they could at any moment, like if the people really don't want it, they could overthrow it, and they don't. And so that was the eye-opening where I was like, oh wow, like the rest of the world does not think of democracy, just to keep it simple, the way that I do. Yeah. And honestly, now I'm beginning to wonder if even kids growing up now think of democracy the way that I do. And if demographics are destiny, I get a little unnerved because I am in the process of formulating my opinion about this. So a lot of what I have is emotion. So going back to your early things, that we are emotional creatures and the way that we feel determines what we see. A lot of the emotion that I have not solidified into an updated worldview is I'm very unnerved by the amount of division in the country. And I don't see, knowing what I know about humans, I don't see how we get back on to coming together without massive suffering. Now, with enough suffering, we will, but I don't see how we'll come back together without just a tremendous amount of suffering.
I wish I could disagree with you, but I agree with you. Not only would it take a tremendous amount of suffering for us to reunite, but our biggest threats right now are also aware that as long as we don't suffer, we're not really going to unite. So they can just execute, as long as they can execute cleanly on a consistent vision, they will. Because you know what we cannot do? We cannot execute cleanly on a consistent vision. Yeah. And I believe in the American experiment, and I believe that the world is safer with the United States being the global superpower. But I also think that the world hasn't come to that conclusion on its own. So maybe what we need is a different global superpower for a while before the world is like, you know what? Maybe we don't like this, right? Maybe we want to return to another system.
God, I hope it doesn't come to that.
I hope it doesn't come to that either, because you and I won't be here for that. My kids will be, right? My grandkids will be the ones going through that transition. And that's not going to be a pretty transition. And who knows? It's the thing is that, again, knowing how people work, we are hardwired. Human beings are wired to survive. We are not wired to thrive. We are wired to survive.
Ouch. Yeah.
The human brain, the processing that goes between the amygdala and the sensory cortex and all the different parts of your left and right brain that help you reach conclusions, they were all built and they have all evolved around the idea of individual survival. So whatever happens, human beings will survive, will adapt, and will survive. We might suffer along the way, but Buddhism says suffering is part of the experience, right? So to avoid suffering is almost contrary to the faith-based, the dominant faith-based religions in the world, right? Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, they all agree suffering is unavoidable. But human beings still find a way to persevere. I would love to not have that happen, but if I was in charge of any country that didn't want the United States to be the new global superpower, I would just let the United States continue to pick at its toenails like it does right now, right? We're the fat dude in the corner picking at our hangnail, while the rest of the world is working out, exercising, getting smart, and getting ready to go to war, right?
So when you take a look at the battlefield here, not the literal battlefield, but the landscape of Israel and Palestine, what you have is something that in many ways goes all the way back to biblical days. Abraham, who's the father of all nations, had two sons, Ishmael and Isaac. Ishmael became the father of Islam. Isaac became the father of Judaism and on to become the father of Christianity. So the conflict that exists between Palestine, a Muslim country, or a Muslim group, and Israel, a Jewish, largely predominantly Jewish group, essentially is the generational ongoing conflict between Isaac and Ishmael.
And is there, so forgive me, dear listeners, but I think of this as a story and a very powerful story, but one designed to convey things at each branch. So between the brothers, I have to imagine there was a tale that we learn about each brother. Each brother represents something. What do the brothers represent?
So I am not creative enough, I think, to speak to the literary element of
Jordan Peterson. No, for real. Like, this is his whole shtick.
Yeah.
Like, showing how basically modern humanity can be read through the lens of religious
Ancient
traditions
story.
and what those stories tell you. Most people haven't read his book, Maps of Meaning. It is unbelievably good. Anyway, so that part we don't have. We have a dot point that has a gap. Maybe we won't be able to fill it in here, but I get your point. So we've got the two brothers.
Yep.
They create two different traditions.
And they both have valid claim all the way back to the biblical.
A valid claim of what?
A valid claim all the way back to biblical and or Quranic tradition to being tied to the father of all nations.
Okay. What does that matter?
Because for both of them, what they're really trying to say is that they have a right to survive in equality, that they are tied to the father of all nations.
But does this come down to, hey, we're tied to the father of all nations, and that manifests as dirt? And so this dirt and rock is rightfully mine.
I think that's the oversimplified way that the Western world has.
Is it oversimplified, or is that really what, like, at some point this manifests as something either ideological or tangible?
So the place where it becomes tangible and ideological is in the end of World War II. At the end of World War II, the Jewish diaspora that had been hunted and killed by the Nazi Party needed a country of their own. And because other countries in the world didn't want to take on the refugees, they essentially took them all to the Palestinian state that is now known as Israel. And the Western allies granted the boundaries of Israel and said, this is where the Jews should live. This is where Jerusalem exists. This is where this is their homeland, where they were born, where they came from.
Going back to the brothers.
But the Palestinian Muslims were already there. They had never been displaced from their homeland. So by having the West create a nation state, create boundaries and everything for a group of religious people, Jews that were persecuted during World War II, now all of a sudden the West defined the organizational national structure of Israel. And that's where the conflict really started, because now you had Western allies saying, this is the Jewish state defining itself as Israel, the Palestinian diaspora, who were now being forced from their own homeland, saying, but we were already here. Like, this is Jerusalem is the city where Muhammad ascended into heaven. Like, this is a holy place for us too. And so the West was just like, well, then you can both share it. We're going home, right? We got a party after VE Day. We're done here. And that's where everything started. From there, you also then had Western powers funding and fueling the economic success of Israel.
And by the way, I just want people listening at home, you are providing a very fast
painting. I know enough to know that there's,
Lots
God
of
only knows how
complexity.
much history of conflict before 1948, where these boundaries are laid and all that stuff. I just want people to understand this is an exercise in how to think through a difficult problem.
Right.
This is not a one-for-one accurate representation of everything. You will need a far longer video from experts in this field. We go into this conversation fully understanding that. But I do think to the initial framing of this episode, I think it's very important to understand what I'm trying to do. I think putting your head down is the wrong move at this particular moment in history. There are probably times that come and go throughout history where it is okay to put your head down. And for the first 40 years of my life, I had my head down and it worked out wonderfully. But this moment feels different. Now, that could be a mirage. Maybe it's just my age and everybody sort of pokes their head up at this point in their age and starts thinking the way that I'm thinking. I don't know. But this moment really does feel different to me. And we'll get into AI and some other things later. I think there are a lot of threats on the board right now. Certainly AI technology, social media, all of that. We talked about velocity and volume of information earlier. All of that's at play. So anyway, I just want to set that stage so the comments doesn't waste time with like the boring shit, like, because yes, simplistic viewpoint here from the setting of the table, we'll talk, okay, but what do you do now?
Right.
And what I really hope, because I think that the comments are going to end up being a big part of what makes this episode useful to a larger audience. So I hope that we can eliminate some of the more, I don't want people to get bogged down in the wrong thing. So yes, many details to talk about. We just need to set a quick table so that then we can talk about things like, hey, when humans have a historical conflict over who has a right to the land without getting lost in the minutia of that, how do you move forward? And that just, again, so we're setting the table. Sorry.
No, so it's fair. So I'll set the table faster too.
No. I don't need you to set it faster because I know no matter how much you do, we're not going to get there. The more detail you have, give it to me for sure.
Fair enough. So then what ended up happening was now we have, as the West places the Jewish diaspora into Israel and supports the establishment of a Jewish state, we then also have the responsibility of the West in fueling the economy for the Jewish state. Because you can't, we did the same thing in Japan. We're going to rebuild. There's economic benefits to the United States in rebuilding foreign countries. There's economic benefits in having allies that you help economically rebuild. So fast forward till today, and now you have Israel had this massive boost economically from Western partners and Western allies when they were placed in Israel. The Palestinian counterparts did not have access to that financial benefit that the Israelis did. So there's, like you said, decades of conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, and everything's documented out there, and there's 1,000 ways that you can look at it and interpret it and whatever else. But in the end, what happened was the Palestinians, through the lens of most Muslim countries, became oppressed, became ostracized from their own land, their own nation, where they could thrive and to build an economy and build a political establishment and build a legacy for their future. Because that land was being supported and developed by the Jewish state, and the Jewish state and the Muslim state just didn't want to get along for a number of reasons that we don't really have a say in because we didn't live there at the time, right? And that's how I interpret the many years of historical conflict between Palestinians and Israelis in that country. The place where we have to fast forward this to is till 1997. In 1987, Hamas became a political group that was supporting Palestinians in their fight to resist what was perceived to be Israeli oppression. Hamas became the more aggressive group versus the Palestinian Authority, which became what's known as a secular group or a non-religious group. And those became the two political powers vying for support from the Palestinian people. And at the time in 1987, the vast majority of that support went to the Palestinian Authority, not to Hamas. Hamas's promise at the time was, we will destroy the Israeli country and we will return the entire country back to the Muslim people. Not a religious war. They weren't going after killing Jews. They were trying to destroy Israel. Not that it makes it that much better, but at least to clarify what their ambitions were in 1987. Nobody determined that Hamas was a terrorist organization in 1987, despite their claim, despite their promise to eradicate Israel. In 1997, following major terrorist attacks inside the United States, the peak being the Timothy McVeigh bombing of Oklahoma City, the United States became very focused on terrorism and counterterrorism. And in 1987, they created the terrorist watch list, or the foreign terrorist organization list. And in that list, they listed every Muslim extremist group as a terrorist organization. On that list, Hamas was included. So at that moment in time in 1997, based on what was happening in the United States in their struggle with extremism, they targeted Muslim extremism as one of the many extremisms that they would list as terrorist organizations. That's why even today, the United States lists Hamas as a terrorist group, where most of the rest of the world does not. There's only 12 countries total that list Hamas as a terrorist organization. And in many ways, it's because those 12 countries, those 11 countries take the lead, they follow the lead of the United States. The UN as an organization does not list Hamas as terrorist. So in 1997, Hamas becomes a terrorist group, but they're this terrorist group that also has a political arm that's supporting and taking care of the Palestinian people within Gaza. That's already kind of a mess. That becomes complicated, right? Palestine can't create a standing army. They can't create their own standing economy. They can't create foreign trade. They can't create anything significant because they're not recognized as a nation. So a few Muslim countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Egypt recognize the Palestinian people, but not the Palestinian state. And everybody recognizes the right of the Palestinians to a state, but nobody wants to say what that state is going to be. So that becomes a mess that most of the first world doesn't even follow, doesn't really care about until things start blowing up in Israel and Palestine. October 7th, 2023, this group known as Hamas, based out of Gaza, conducts this massive incursion. The most doctrinally correct word is it was an incursion across a border within one country, closest to a civil war, much closer to a civil war than an attack from a foreign nation, right? They carry out this incursion that uses terrorist tactics, terrorist tools, but also targets military targets for a political goal that has been stated and consistent since 1987. Now we live in this world where what is this thing that's happening? The United States labels the group as a terrorist group. However, all humanitarian aid that we send to Palestine has to go through Hamas. Like, they control the politics, they control the governance, they control the hospitals. Not terror. Al-Qaeda never controlled hospitals, right? It's not as clear as we think it is, but it's hard to get that nuance across with the velocity and volume of information. So now we live in this world where velocity and volume of information make it so that we all see the dead bodies and the crying children and the dying women on the Palestinian side, but we also read about the atrocities that were executed against these Israelis in a surprise attack on October 7th. We're faced with all the information, and there's no clarity as to what's really the nuance, what's really the battlefield, what are we really looking at here? So you've got Israel trying to counter what they know is a threat to their national sovereignty, but they've also got a problem with a group that was created because of the oppression they put on the Palestinian people. And that is what the group states is their whole core purpose. The reason they exist at all is because of that oppression. So you've got this absolute mess that the world is watching play out day to day, but at the same time, the world isn't invested enough to actually try to resolve the conflict.
Okay. So one, I want to acknowledge that is a sketch from a perspective. Again, speaking to the comment section right now. Of course, there are going to be different perspectives on that. I don't know this well enough to feel like I have a perspective, but I will lay out a few things that I am aware of as a way of filling in additional color to your point about trying to triangulate based on opposing viewpoints. And I think yours is from the different voices that I've heard, yours is relatively sedate. There are people that are far sort of harder on the Palestinian side, though I'd say you lean pro-Palestinian. I don't know if that feels right to you, but that seems reasonable. You're pretty middle of the road, but if you have a lean, it's that way. So some of the other chips that I've heard by way of putting dots that people will have to connect as they try to build a narrative that creates the emotion that allows them to have a way of thinking how to move forward would be, okay, you mentioned the Jews are coming out of the Holocaust. So you've just had 6 million people in the diaspora, literally at an industrial level, killed in unimaginably horrific ways. And I can only imagine. You started this by saying like they're able to trace all of this back to the brothers and the split and the way that sort of goes. And you mentioned compasses earlier. And if you get off by 3 degrees in the beginning, it doesn't seem like much, but 1,000 years later, there's a huge gulf between you, which is very much what this feels like. I bring that up to say that you really can go back and back and back on who owns the land. You can go back and back and back on who did who wrong. And so trying to find like where it all started is probably not super fruitful. But if you're the Israelis, or if you're a Jew post World War II, never again, we're going to be strong this time. We're going to build a nation state. That nation state has to be somewhere. We go back to the region of Judea, which is where they derive their name from. So to your point, they were removed from their homeland, but still very much spiritually, that probably isn't the right word, but there's a thing there where they still have a massive identity in that region that they're tied to even all these years later. Also, it's my understanding that there was no official Palestinian state. So it's not like the Jews went in and took over a state. So the West, I'm now guessing, I want to be very clear about sort of where I'm teleporting myself into the mind of somebody and when I'm offering what I think are facts. Now I am very much speaking like a writer would speak. But if I'm the West and I'm like, there's no state here anyway, I don't really fully understand the conflict. I can see bad things coming because I'm smart and I understand humans well enough. There's probably going to be some drama here, which is why the US actually pulls their support at one point of this whole idea. But nonetheless, it's like, we'll do it. We'll bone out. To your point, we want to go celebrate. We've just won World War II. And I don't see a better solution. So let's see what happens. Through all of that, there are times where a two-state solution has been proposed. The Palestinians reject it. There's the whole notion of from the river to the sea. They don't believe that there's any amount of Israel that can exist. I'm using the word Israel very intentionally as opposed to Jews. This is where I don't know it well enough to know if that accurately captures the spirit. It certainly accurately captures the PR. That is very much how it is presented. No, this isn't about religious difference. This is not a racist thing. This is just purely Israel has occupied our land that is rightfully ours, and we want to get rid of the nation state of Israel. Now, of course, functionally, the way that you do that is by killing people, ripping them, tearing them from their land, because they will, of course, fight back. If they were all just willing to up and leave, then sure, but we know that that's not going to happen. So multiple times that's offered and rejected for the reasons that I just laid out. And you end up in a position now where you gave me a piece that I had not heard before, so it's very interesting, because I looked at this and was like, okay, Israel ends up thriving economically and Palestine has not. Now, of course, I'm aware of the positioning of it's an open air prison. How could they ever hope to? You have these people that have just subjugated them. And of course, the economy is never going to grow. What I had never heard before, and it's very interesting, is, well, the West really helped them when they were in that nascent, fragile place. The West helped them get their feet under them. I think it begs the question, what have they been doing with the aid that they've gotten? Because it's billions of dollars. And so one would hope that they would be spending that on infrastructure. So anyway, this is where I now start going, okay, I don't know how many more pieces it makes sense to put on the table, because I have a base assumption that now we're just getting into who's right and who's wrong. I have a base assumption that this will continue to be an intractable problem if you are approaching this from right and wrong, which is why, again, as a headline reader, the Abraham Accords strike me as very positive, because it was just human greed,
Yeah.
to use a terrible word for something that maybe isn't bad at all, which is when people are thriving economically, the people feel good. You feel like you have a future. You have hope that your kids' lives will be better than yours. And when you get people in that kind of momentum, now they're pointed in a positive direction. So again, I'm leaking my base assumptions here. So my base assumption is you have to give the Palestinian people a sense of a future, that their kids' lives will be better than theirs, that you want to fill them with hope and optimism and all of that. Now, you're not going to do that with the who's right and who's wrong. Now, I happen to have a weird sort of thing in my life that makes me maybe look at things a little bit differently. Again, frame of reference, this is bias now. But my wife's family is from Cyprus. And for people that don't know the history of Cyprus, it is freakishly similar to the Israel-Palestine conflict. You had Greeks and Turks living on the same little island. If you've never looked it up, like this is not a big place, living on the same island. And one day in the 70s, I think, late 60s, early 70s, the Turks invade and they cut the island in half. And the people on the north side of the island, my wife's family included, they're just stripped of everything. This house isn't yours. It was yours Monday morning when you woke up. Monday night, it's not your house. We've seen these videos play out in Israel-Palestine. So we know this drama. And I mean, gut-wrenching, as you can imagine. You literally lose everything in an instant, man. Like I can't imagine. Like if tonight this house and everything that I own ceased to be mine, that would be obviously the most traumatic thing that ever happened to me in my life. So brutal. The crazy thing is that you don't have the same ongoing bloodshed between the Greeks and the Turks. And so it makes me ask, what is different? Because you have the same sense of the Greeks, like that's not their land to take. They have no right to that land. That was our land. We were kicked out of it. It's rightfully ours. You can trace it back. So much, history of Greeks occupying the island, raising it, from nothingness, taming it, all that. The Greeks have a very long history. And so, and I'm sure the Turks would say the same thing, right? So even though you have all of that, you have not got the same, they've managed to reach stability. So the question becomes, what is different? And this is where it seems to me that you have to at least begin exploring the ideologies and what's happening. And again, you're never going to get either side to give up their religion. So for me, as I think through this difficult problem, I'm just saying whatever solution you're going to propose has to take that off the table. You cannot ask them to go, oh, the other person's right. Their religion is correct. They're not going to do that. You can't ask them to go, you're right. We're just going to move out of Israel and hand it over. They're never going to do that. And given that in 2005, the Jews pulled out of the West Bank and out of the Gaza Strip, and it didn't solve the conflict. So even if another was like, hey, but if you just leave this area, then everything really will be fine. They don't have a reason to believe. Like historically, just the way the humans are, they're going to be like, no, we tried that and it didn't work. So you got to take that off the table. So now when I think about, okay, as I tell entrepreneurs all the time, if you have a difficult problem to solve, ask yourself, has anybody solved this problem in the past? And if you want to look at it from apartheid, cool. Look at South Africa. What did they get right? Or look at some of the countries where a new nation state was born. And is that the right way to handle this? And then you can start at least mapping out why those would or wouldn't work. And from what I hear, because the first time I heard of a two-state solution, I was like, that makes sense to me. Yeah, perfect. I can't believe I didn't think of that, right? and then everyone's like, yeah, no, nobody considers that realistic anymore. But that feels like the thing we have to find out. That is a gap that we'll never be able to resolve this until we find out why having a two-state solution won't work. Do you think I'm crazy about that? Or because that to me feels like you have to put your finger on that and say, why doesn't the two-state solution exist? The first argument I think is going to be Israel has no right to exist. They occupied this territory. And then I'm like, I get it. Cyprus, again, horrible. Fucking, if you want to get the people that I know and love in tears, all you need to do is talk about that day. So I have seen a similar heartache up close. but that's going to be militaristic, right? That's guns, death, bloodshed. And is that really a game you want to play when Israel's a way more accomplished military? Probably not. Do you want it spreading wider in the region? Speaking as a guy in America, so discount my opinion because I'm not in it. That sounds horrible to me. And again, let me leak my bias. I'm making the base assumption that we should be trying to avoid death. If that isn't on somebody's bingo card, that's where we'll disconnect. We'll be two ships passing the night. Anyway, so I put my finger on that. That feels like the thing that has to be addressed. And if the punchline is from the river to the sea, all that's left is military. So yeah, where does any of that thinking go wrong? In terms of just finding the thing that we have to say, we have to understand this thing.
I don't know that I would label any of that thinking as wrong. There's a couple of places where I think it's worth clarifying. So like I mentioned earlier, I tend to look at everything through a lens of practicality, right? Value, fact, vast versus truth, right? And you made a base assumption about me earlier. You tried to verify it, that I'm pro-Palestine. I pull heavy from my espionage background. And one of the key things that was taught to me by the director of CIA, by General Petraeus, was you don't disclose your position. Because as soon as you disclose your position, you've disclosed your position. I was mentioning that to you earlier about information superiority, right? I've never disclosed my position.
I should have asked you 10% questions.
I will disclose my position for you.
Oh, word.
Right? So impact theory exclusive for anybody who cares. I am actually pro-Israel. But the reason I'm pro-Israel is not what I think people will understand. I am pro-Israel because I am very matter-of-factly pro-America. I am pro-United States. The country that I think should remain the dominant superpower in the world is the United States. To aid the United States in that objective, we must ensure the survival of Israel and the Israeli state. Practically speaking, not ideologically, not based on history and justice and everything else, what's happening to the Palestinian people is an atrocity. It's a terrible, sad thing that has forced them into a path of revolutionary terrorism, very similar to what we saw when the United States was rejecting the civil rights movement, when women weren't allowed to vote and they turned to violence. Like, we've seen this before. And it is a sad, tragic thing. What's happened to Palestine, what has happened to Palestine, what is yet to happen to Palestine. All of that being acknowledged, as an American who wants to see American primacy in the future, we have to stand up and support the Israeli state. Having a strategic, economic, and military partner like Israel sit next to our strategic and military partner that is Jordan in the Middle East gives us an incredible economic and military advantage over the entire globe that we cannot sacrifice. Ideology aside, if we want to protect American lives, we have to ensure the long-term longevity, support, and close relationships with the Israeli people and with the country of Israel. That is my official position. What I find is so sad is that there are so few pro-Israel voices that are giving any kind of validation to the Palestinian plight. So I want to be one of those voices that can say, we must partner and support Israel. And the way that we partner and support them is by finding a way for them to protect and defend themselves without turning to this kind of destruction. Because as long as they turn down this path of destruction, they're isolating themselves from everyone else in the world. And that makes it so that we have a very hard time standing next to them as the beacon of freedom in the world. We have a hard time supporting Israel in the face of everybody else, including all the countries of the United Nations and NATO, who look at us and say, how can you stand by and let this happen? How can you support this? How can you fund this? How can you encourage this? Not to mention the corruption challenges that Israel has that so closely align with the corruption challenges of our own past presidential, hopefuls and presidents that we're trying to work through ourselves, between Netanyahu's corruption and Trump's corruption, right? It's a mess, and it's a sad mess. But the bottom line practical element here is that Israel encourages and expands national security objectives for the United States. That doesn't mean we should call Hamas terrorists just because we don't want to call them revolutionary terrorists, which is really more akin to what Malcolm X was, revolutionary terrorism, right? We don't want to go down that road because it's too nuanced for the American people. Instead, we're going to put big billboards up in major cities that say, Hamas is not just Israel's problem, right? Hamas is your problem too. So I say all that because my conclusion is the same as your conclusion. The world, the globe, needs to broker a two-state solution. And in order to incentivize that two-state solution, we need to rally and give the Palestinians that economic boost that the Israelis got post-World War II. Let's find a way to massively expedite their infrastructure, their technology, their ability to self-govern. Let's give them everything they need. If that means that they want to have close ties with the Arab world, that's exactly what the Arab world has wanted forever. That's why Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the UAE rushed to the aid of the Palestinians. So let's make that happen. And when we negotiate land, let's find a way to make sure that they're neighboring a Arab ally like Jordan or Egypt. Let's find a way to make that happen. Let's make it a world problem instead of saying it's their problem. Because every pair of brothers who has ever had an argument over business, they've needed an arbitrator to help them. They've needed the help of others to come to a meaningful way of resolving their conflict. I'm not trying to oversimplify it, but I am saying like a strong Israel is in America's best interest. A strong, peaceful Middle East is in America's best interest. A strong Muslim world that counterbalances Iran is in America's best interest. So we need to find a way to let people know that this is a more complex issue than what they're hearing, and we're not afraid of the complexity. Let's lean into the complexity and let's solve it together. Because the more that America can influence peace around the world, the more that America is an influential power in the world. And when we don't step into our influence, we leave a vacuum that allows our largest adversaries, Russia, China, Iran, to step into that vacuum instead. And that's exactly what we're seeing in the global world right now. We're seeing not only are those countries stepping into the vacuum that we're leaving behind, but they're allying together. So much so that even Hollywood movies like Leave the World Behind is literally showing what would happen if North Korea and Iran worked together to cut off the United States. That's why there were elements of both languages in the movie itself, right? Spoiler alert. But my point is, if even modern media, if even Hollywood is showing this division from east to west, that goes to show how much it's real, because art reflects reality.
Okay, so one thing I think we have to acknowledge, if we're going to at least put all the pieces on the table, and I just want to reiterate, I don't have the hubris to think I'm the man to turn to solve this problem. Trust me.
I would turn to you. I thought that was a really good solution, man. That was a good solution.
I don't think we have a real one yet because of something you taught me, which is that you really have to get in the mind of your enemy. And every assumption I have, I know is coming from my own frame of reference, which could not be more Western, could not be more American. And they don't want the same things I want. So I'll ask arguably the hardest question of all: how much does the cultural mindset of the Palestinians or the Israelis, is this a cultural collision from just the way that they view how things ought to be, that you're just never going to be able to deal with that? Or is this, well, Iran is throwing so much money around, they're just doing their bidding? Like, what is the point of, like, if I'm Iran and I want to destabilize Israel and get the world to turn on them, what's the lever that I pull to get the Palestinian people to do what I want them to do? Is it a religious lever that I pull? Is it something else?
So in the radicalization process, one of the things that we're taught at CIA is that there's a ladder of radicalization, an actual process for how you radicalize an extremist. And that's an extremist, whether they're a Christian extremist or an ethnic extremist or a Muslim extremist. There's a ladder of extremism. And the first step is validating an injustice. It's the first step, because when people believe that there's a perceived injustice and nobody validates that injustice, then they are conditioned, they are primed to believe that there was no injustice and they're just angry about nothing. So the first step in a radicalization process is to validate an injustice. It's independent of religion, right? This was done to you. It should have never been done to you. And then the next step in the radicalization ladder is to create the aggressor who's guilty of the injustice. This should have never happened to you. It happened to you because of this villain. It's a story. Mm. And now your injustice has been validated, and there is a group that executed that injustice on you. The next step in the ladder is to say, there are others like you who have been equally treated in this unjust way by the same group. So now the person who's walking up this ladder is like, I do have a reason to be angry. They are the enemy. And there's this group that I can join against the same enemy. And you can see how this ladder just keeps on going until it ends with you strap a bomb to yourself and you run into their church and you run into their synagogue and you blow yourself up and now you win. You can see how the ladder plays out, right? The way that you defeat extremism is by taking out the first step in the ladder. You have to take away the injustice. Unfortunately, what's happened since October 7th has created generational repercussions. There will not be a Palestinian for the next 3 generations who does not have a visceral memory. A dead brother, a dead sister, a dead child, a dead mother, a dead grandmother, a dead grandfather, aunts, uncles. There have been so many killed in this attack, in this counterattack since October 7th, that it's left a generational scar that is going to be 50 years worth of work for everybody who gets in on the action to try to resolve this problem. We will have to face and accept that there was an injustice that was carried out and that we can resolve it. So that instead of taking people up a ladder of radicalization, we can take them through a ladder of healing, a ladder of resolution, right? What happened here, what is continuing to happen every day, is fixable. We can't fix what's happened already, but we can fix what we do moving forward. We can give people an option. We can give people solutions, give them outcomes. 60 Minutes can change a life if you give them an outcome. So what outcomes can we reach that changes the whole trajectory of what's happening in the Middle East? We have to be willing to ask ourselves that question. And where the rubber really meets the road, where it gets really uncomfortable for us, is that we have to be willing to accept that mistakes were made, policy mistakes, narrative mistakes, military mistakes, and that we are going to pay the reputational and financial penalty of those mistakes that were made. We have to do that if we're going to really invest in a solution to what's happening in the Middle East. Unfortunately, it is just easier when your neighbors are fighting to just stay out of the fight. But if we really want to stand as the leader of the free world, we have to find a way to create freedom for both peoples in the Middle East. We have to be invested in both peoples in the Middle East, not to mention the fact that the closer we get to the Muslim world, the more secure we will be against Islamic extremism, because we won't be isolated. We won't stand opposite Islam and Muslim evolution and Muslim development. We will find a way to partner with it and not be a world divided by boundaries and faith and religion, but a world that's connected by a common belief in humanity and connection. We can do that. It will be expensive. It will be time consuming. It will be a lot of eating crow and humble pie. But if we can do it for 50 years, that doesn't seem like a long time. Consider the fact that Israel didn't even exist before 1948. Mm. In the annals of time, they're less than 100 years old. They're still a young country. We're still a young country, right? If we can evolve and change and come to our adolescence, then certainly they can evolve and change before they even reach their adolescence. Again, maybe that's too ideological, but
Monday through Friday, if I'm awake, I'm either working or working out, which means I need energy, focus, and a ton of quality sleep. That's where AG1 comes in. Kickstart your day with a supplement that enhances gut health and tastes fantastic. You guys know I do not normally support supplements, but AG1 is made from whole foods. This powerhouse blend is packed with 75 premium vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients that elevate your immune system, uplift your mood, and promote restful sleep. The travel packs make it easy to keep your greens on hand, and AG1 is now offering you guys a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Simply race to drinkag1.com/impact theory.
I think that it is probably too, it's too idealistic, maybe. It's too Pollyanna. So, but it begs the next question, which is, okay, and using enemy is not probably ideal language, which again is a step in this whole process of thinking through something well, understanding how you have to change your own frame of reference, which I think is going to be a big part of this. But if I were consulting on this project, I would be really trying to understand, okay, what is the mindset of the people that I'm dealing with? What are the things that I know I'm not going to be able to alter? So like the religious angle, I'm going to have to find a way for them to see like a connection or to ignore it. I'm not going to be able to get them to adopt each other's way of thinking. Okay, so I still come back to, we have to have a goal. I think the goal has to be that the Palestinians feel they are in control of their own destiny. I just really, look, that is a Western notion that not everybody in the world agrees with. So I'm very open to if that's my fundamental flaw in my thinking, but my thinking is built upon that for them to really have hope in their future and to believe that their children's lives will be better, that they have to feel a sense that they own their own destiny, they control their own lives, they can build the nation the way that they want to. And, so I need to understand, given that you have to remove the idea of we're just going to get rid of the Jewish people. You are inviting them to fight tooth and nail, and they're currently so much better at that than you that it's just a death knell. So I would take that off the table in terms of it's not going to lead to the outcome I'm going for anyway. So if we take that off the table, then I need to understand why the two-state solution continues to be rejected. Because if it's for religious reasons, then we have to either confront that directly and create a new narrative. One thing that I think people underestimate is the need for off-ramps. And this was something I heard people very wisely talk about with Russia and Ukraine. People were very angry with Putin for invading a sovereign nation, and rightly so. But if you don't give him an off-ramp, where he can save face and look good to his people, you are guaranteeing an escalation.
correct.
And so while it's gross and it's icky and fucking hateful and nobody wants to do it, it's certainly going to save lives. Again, what's your goal? And if your goal is, I'm perfectly happy for every single Ukrainian to die trying to push back Russia, okay, then if that's your goal, then you're making choices that make sense with that. If that isn't your goal, then putting on the table an off-ramp for Putin would be wise.
Right.
Because both Zelensky and Putin need off-ramps to be able to go to their people and say, see, we got a victory.
Right.
And so if I were helping advise or negotiate, I'd just be thinking about that. Like, how do I help them each save face? Even if I think one or both of them are horrendous, I'm still going to give them an off-ramp because it's the only way this is going to happen. So I'm thinking, okay, like, what are our off-ramps here? How do both sides get to save face and feel like, okay, we quote unquote won this thing and that there's an empowering narrative for both of them? So that has to be found. So whether that is, I'm reading a book right now called Silk Roads, really interesting book. A pretty, and I don't know how accurate it is, so full disclosure, but a really interesting take on history about how East and West have sort of bumped into each other over and over throughout time. And that the author was painting this really fascinating picture where there were a time where there wasn't seen to be a big gap between Muslims and Jews. And I found that very interesting. And they weren't really bothered by the differences in each other's faith. So anyway, I would look into that to see, is there really something there where we can paint a far more united vision, married to an economic reality? Because if we can make their lives better quickly, then suddenly that becomes very interesting. And so marrying it to your idea of, okay, how do we get real infrastructure built so that their lives really are better, whether that's education, better hospitals, better roads. I don't know.
Right.
There I have nothing but ignorance to offer. But there is a thing you can do that builds a stable entity where you can get food, shelter, water, education, and life starts moving in the right direction. So what are those things? How do you avoid corruption? All that, of course, would be hyper complicated. And I don't know enough about the Abraham Accords. Again, I'm very much a headline reader there, but given how much enthusiasm was going into that and it's economic in nature, can you get that back on track? But you have to do something where you really are giving them a super tangible win.
Yeah, the thing that's missing, I feel like, in a lot of the conversations is to understand that what's happening in Israel is a proxy conflict between Iran and the United States. And
what does Iran want?
Ultimately what Iran wants is a Shia crescent, something they've been after for a long time.
Is it ideological in nature? Is it power in nature?
It's power and landmass. It really is a caliphate.
I don't know what a caliphate is.
A Islamic homeland that stretches beyond Iran, right? And is Shia Islam in nature, not Sunni Islam, which is the predominant Islam throughout the Khalijian Arabic speaking states. So that's really what Iran wants. And they struggle to get that. And the largest counterbalance to Iran isn't the United States, it's Saudi Arabia. So when you actually hone in on the Middle East, the two big powers like counterbalancing each other are Saudi Arabia and Iran. The United States is just an outside player.
Saudi's a lot bigger than Iran, though,
Saudi's
by GDP.
A lot bigger by GDP, a lot bigger by landmass. However, the breadbasket of the Middle East is Iran. The breadbasket of that's so significant, it means that UAE and Oman and Jordan and Saudi Arabia all list Iran as an enemy, but they all get their agriculture from Iran. The cucumbers, the fresh fruit, the vegetables, it's a carve out so that they can continue to have agricultural trade with Iran. Another thing that people don't realize is that there's carve outs all the time.
And that is the power of economics.
That's the power of economics.
Because Iran then could just choke them all off.
Correct.
But they want the money.
Correct. Iran wants some form of income and revenue.
Yeah.
And they've been sanctioned in so many ways. So it's just, to your point about needing an economic and a religious solution, I don't fully disagree, but I would prioritize economics first. Because if you can incentivize people economically, economics runs the world.
Oh, for sure.
If you can incentivize people economically to cooperate, they will find a way for their religions to also cooperate, right? They will find a way to say, hey, you know what? We all come from the same Papa Bear. We all came from everybody, all the nations, they come from us. Like, let's get along. Let's do that, right? That's something that France can't say. That's something the United States can't say. The United States definitely can't say that we come from anybody. We're the bastard children of everybody. We just flocked here, right? So there's absolutely a solution there ideologically. What isn't there is a solution economically. And it's not just about economically incentivizing the Palestinians. It's also about economically incentivizing the Israelis. It takes two sets of economic stimulus, two sets of economic benefits, and even better if they can be economic benefits that are commingled, right? So the more success in Israel, the more success in Palestine, the more success in Palestine, the more success in Israel, right? Create a sense of independence among them. Unfortunately, creating independent partners is something the United States is very bad at. We, since World War II, have specialized in creating dependent partners. That's why NATO doesn't really like us very much anymore. That's why France and Spain and Germany are actively opponents of the United States in NATO. because they realize that what we've really done is made all of Europe dependent on the United States for their technology, for their trade, for their financial solvency. And now the same thing it's difficult for the United States to adopt a different sort of policy than essentially economic bullying. And that's something we're going to have to learn how to do, right? It's something that I think an old generation of capitalists believed that you had to be the biggest in order to be safe. What I think the new era of capitalists is learning is that we can be innovative, successful, financially independent, financially solvent. We can be a lot of things and still be totally safe, because it's only when you're competing for the top space that you're really at risk. Nobody really cares about everybody else who's just, even people who are thriving. People overlook all the people who are thriving. They focus on the very poor and they focus on the very rich. So, I mean, I hope to one day run a $50 million business. And in the eyes of business, that's still small. I think the actual cutoff for small business is $45 million a year. Think about that. You can run a $35 million business and still be classified as a small business. Yeah. I'm not trying to compete with $100 billion businesses, or not trying to compete up. I want to make an impact. I want to build wealth. I want to make a difference in the world. I want to leave a legacy for my children. Much like many entrepreneurs, we want to make a splash, but we don't need to make the biggest splash. The United States I believe that the United States is still the best option of all the bad options. We're the best bad option for how the world should lean through superpower dominance. Until a better solution presents itself, I'm going to continue investing in American primacy. That's why my company is an American company, and I couldn't be prouder to pay American taxes, right? Because my business is helping to fund a stronger America. That makes me very proud. It makes me very happy. But there's plenty of Indians and Singaporeans and Thais who are also very proud that their business is building their country.
Proxy wars. How serious is this? There are days where I wake up and I feel like, no, for real, like we are a couple errant missiles from this escalating, and World War III like kicks off in earnest. And the way that I see that playing out is if Iran comes out of the shadows and says, you've gone too far, like we have to step in and do something. And then America has to step in to protect Israel to make good on their promises. And then China starts watching that and goes, the US has drained its surpluses in Ukraine and now in Israel. Now's the time for us to move on Taiwan. They move on Taiwan. And now all hell has broken loose, and you legitimately have a world war. And this is one where, man, I'm a layperson that can draw a pretty believable path to how we get there. And I can only imagine somebody that actually is, I forget what you called it, like read in or whatever, like they're getting like the intelligent briefs, be like, yeah, that's one of the 17 ways that this could escalate and really pop off. Am I falling into conspiracy? Or are we really at a tenuous moment?
We are really at a tenuous moment. That is a yes, hard yes. We are at a tenuous moment. However, what I would say is that what you're falling into is not conspiracy. It's something we call catastrophizing. You're paving the road catastrophic step by catastrophic step, meaning that everybody turns to the most destructive of all solutions before taking a previous step, right? So, for example, for another country to attack for another state actor to attack the sovereignty of the United States is something nobody wants to do. The deterrence that the United States has through their military, through their economic power, through their reach, that what we call a deterrent is so powerful, it prevents people from taking that catastrophic step. The other thing you have to account for is that not every culture approaches conflict the way that America approaches conflict. We are a warring culture. So we're like, blow the shit out of them. We're going to bomb, we're going to kill, we're going to shoot, we're going to get boots on the ground. We need tanks, we need rifles, we need everything, right? Sun Tzu does not operate that way. the entire Chinese Politburo, the whole Chinese PLA doesn't operate that way. They're not a boots on the ground, kick them in, whatever else. They are a long, slow death by 1,000 cuts. We are a hacksaw, chainsaw, shoot 'em up, cut 'em up country, right? So you've also got Iran in there. You've got Russia in there. You've got Israel in there. You've got Saudi Arabia in there. You've got France, Germany, the UK, all these other big players. They're all in there with their own take on how conflict should escalate and how conflict should be carried out. So when you catastrophize, you take the presumptive path that everybody leaps to the most catastrophic decision, whereas you have to bake into that some level of probability. The highest probability is that no country will attack the sovereignty of the United States. Highest probability, right? Nobody will attack the sovereignty of the United States. So you and me are safe inside American borders. That does not mean that Americans are safe outside of American borders. But then you start getting into the realm of extremism and targeted violence against Americans because of ideological or other purposes. That becomes proxy, right? So now when Americans are attacked in Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo, simply because they're American, and they're attacked by Congolese who are funded by, you name the country, you name Russia, North Korea, like whatever, Iran. Now that becomes murky. Murky is exactly what the world wants when it comes to conflict with the United States. Because if it's murky, the United States has a hard time justifying any kind of response that goes state to state, because there's no smoking gun, right? It becomes just difficult enough. There's plausible deniability. And that's exactly what you're seeing play out here. So again, going back to the whole idea, when you reference World War III happening, when most people reference World War III happening, what they're actually talking about is a nuclear war similar to how World War II ended. Wars evolve like people evolve. And if anything, if you've seen the evolution of technology, you can imagine how much more advanced World War III will be than World War II. All wars, from civil to World War II, were all fought, Vietnam and beyond, were all fought over economics. So if there's a more economically viable way to execute warfare, that is how people will execute warfare. Proxy wars are a very economically viable way to execute wars. Economic wars are a very economically viable way to execute wars. When the United States cut off Russian bank accounts as part of their sanctions against Russia, and they cut off access to Russian funds that were denominated in euros and dollars, that was an economic warfare move. When China floods the market with US dollars and buys yuan or renminbi off the market to change their valuation, that's an act of economic warfare. That is conflict that is so much more cheaper and viable and creates less stress and public response than actually sending your citizens to die at the end of a bullet or a rocket launch, right? So we have to accept that the probability is much higher that we will continue to see increasing proxy conflict, increasing economic conflict, and solutions other than what we call interstate conflict, or conflict between two sovereign nation states. It's very surprising what Russia did in Ukraine, very surprising, because interstate war like that has almost been like eradicated. The last time that a country invaded another sovereign country was when the United States invaded Afghanistan in 2003, right? There's 20-something years where no country had invaded another country. Lots of civil war, but no interstate. So lots of intra-state war, civil war, but no interstate war. So it was a huge turn away from popular military doctrine. But, Putin was playing certain odds, and I think what we're all discovering now is what he really cares about is Eastern Ukraine, where, the predominance of their energy flow goes through, and that's what he's got right now. So I would say that if you take the catastrophizing off the table and you look at probabilities, we will continue to see more proxy wars in more third world countries where the United States has to fund one side and China or Russia or Iran have to fund the opposite side, and they'll keep vying for influence because economically speaking, the country with the most markets to expand into will be the future economic powerhouse of the world. And economic power is what becomes the investment for military power. And that's why the United States is dominant. We've had the economic power to invest in a modern, large military. Only country who's competing with us is China. And the only reason they even have a chance to compete with us is because for 20 years, we were heads down focusing on the global war on terror. China didn't participate in the global war on terror. They spent 20 years with their heads up, stealing secrets and building infrastructure, so that when we finally looked up, we realized, oh shit, like they're growing fast and we got to change something.
Elon Musk says over the last, I think, 20 years that the architecture in China has become far more impressive than what's happening in the US. What do you think the US would look like had we taken all that foreign aid that we've been sending to wars, and not just foreign aid, but to fight the wars, but also to proxy war? Would it look dramatically different?
Yeah, I think the United States would look very, very different. I think we would see, I'm not saying that I think it would look necessarily better, but I am saying it would look very different. Keep in mind that a lot of the investment that went into Chinese infrastructure, was investment into state surveillance systems, tracking populations, tracking state IDs, making sure people stayed in their lane and were only given the opportunities that the state just thought they deserved. I don't think that that's the direction we as Americans would want to go.
I hope not.
But if we were to have taken the hundreds of billions that we spent in our wars abroad and put them into national security and other devices here in the US, for all we know, that could have been one of the options that we pursued, was a large-scale statewide security system that on the piggyback of that is a state surveillance system, very similar to what you see actually in UAE and Saudi Arabia.
That's really interesting. When you first said that it would look different, but you're not sure it would look better, I was like, where is he going with this? That is very interesting. And yes, right now people seem to be way more interested in safety than they do freedom, which it's funny because as a kid, I mean, we have a state, New Hampshire, if I'm not mistaken, live free or die is the state motto. And people now are like, what do you mean? Like, of course, safety is more important than freedom. Like it's flipped so hard from what it was like when I was a kid. When I was a kid, man, it was all about that. Like, give me freedom or give me death. Like I remember, I think that's the line that, in Braveheart, when he said, you can take my life, but you can't take our freedom or something like that. Man, it's a different vibe now.
Did I, and tell me if I'm repeating myself, but did I walk you through the civilization pyramid the last time I was here?
Ooh, I've heard you in so many different places. I can't tell you if it was here or not, but please give us a refresher.
So I feel like what's happening is we're seeing the civilization pyramid actually play out. And the civilization pyramid is a pyramid that talks about exactly what you're describing, the exchange of freedom and security. The bottom of the pyramid is all of our individualism, right? You hunt and gather for you. I hunt and gather for me. You live in your cave. I live in my cave. And I don't have any say in what you do. You don't have any say in what I do. And if we need to fight, then let's fight to the death. Individualism at the bottom end of that pyramid, where we all started, where some countries still very much are, right? Moving up the pyramid, the next tier is tribalism, which is like, hey, our caves are next to each other. You're really good at hunting and hunting. I'm really good at gathering. Let's team up. And now we'll capture efficiencies, because if you're ever sick, I can make sure I collect enough food for both of us. And if I'm ever sick, you can make sure there's enough food for both of us. So now as a tribe, we're safer, and to hell with the other tribes. If they come across the river, if they start hunting our buffalo, we'll kill them. So it's a step above individualism. It gives us some efficiency because we have scalability. It gives us some security because we have each other, and we're united under the banner of a tribe. The next and final peer level of the pyramid is the state. And as you move up from individualism to the state, you start to give up your independent freedoms. But in exchange, the state is able to push down scalable efficiencies and solutions. So now there's a standing military that keeps you safe. Now there's public utilities that bring you water. Now there's hospitals that bring you medicine. Now there's insurance. Now there's businesses. Now there's bakeries. Now there's all this stuff that the state helps to facilitate so that you don't have to depend on your tribe. In fact, if you want to live in California or in Austin, Texas, or in Florida or in New York, you can pick your tribe. You can pick where you want to go because you're all part of the state. If you take the state off the top of the pyramid and you move the rest of the pyramid aside, you have another pyramid. And that's different levels of the state. right? So at the bottom tier of the state, you basically have your organized state that's the government's very small and it gives people maximum freedom, and it's your political parties that don't want to interfere with anybody else's political party. And then as you move up, you have what we consider to be like conservative state management, which is, we have enough government, but not too much government. It creates guidelines, but not heavily regulated. We focus on maximizing efficiency. We minimize policing our people, right? And then you have the highest level of the state, which is very much your kind of socialist or authoritarian state, where everything is regulated, everything is heavily managed, everything is heavily policed. So when you put this smaller pyramid back on top of the original pyramid, you have 6 levels of civilization, basically, right? The theme with all of it is that as you climb the pyramid, you are giving up freedoms in exchange for efficiencies. The beautiful thing about the United States is that we are a country where we slow down our political processes because we have 2 parties that are always fighting and vying, right? So that forces us to slow down, which usually results in a more popular, more well thought out solution, even though we haven't quite seen it play out that way recently. But we slow down the velocity so we make better, stronger decisions that are more time tested. But we also give individuals the right to move up and down the pyramid as they choose. So if you want to be a prepper in Kentucky that lives off the grid, you go right down the pyramid and there you go. You can. If you want to be a hyper, socialist, publicly declared communist that lives in whatever, New York, you can. And both people are protected by the laws of the land, but they live at different parts of the pyramid. So to your point, I feel like we are absolutely at this precipice in world events where we have to kind of decide what we want to do as individuals. But the larger question is, as individuals, we all also have a say in what we do as a nation. And that is going to be the larger impact on what we leave behind.
Do you know what Stuxnet is?
Yeah.
Okay, so give people a quick primer in the context of that was the moment that I realized, oh, there's a whole world happening that I just didn't realize was real. I thought it was only in movies, but like this whole espionage game is deep.
Is deep. Yeah. So, and I would love to go more into that too. But so Stuxnet, quick primer. Stuxnet was a piece of code that was developed specifically to interact with what we knew at the time to be the software system running Iranian uranium enrichment
facilities.
Yeah, there was a very specific tool. It was
reactor?
No. It's going to come back to me here. The what is it when something
centrifuge.
The centrifuge word. That's the word.
I just won whatever game we're playing.
So Stuxnet was a piece of code that was designed specifically to interact with the centrifuge that was used to enrich uranium in Iranian facilities. That's what it was designed to do. It was deployed, it was successful, and then the Iranian facility connected those centrifuges with the larger internet. And when that happened, Stuxnet continued to propagate out of the Iranian facility and into the entire digital universe. So depending on whose story you read, right now, essentially every digital device that's been connected to the internet at any point since like 2007 is infected with Stuxnet.
That's crazy.
But Stuxnet was so well designed that it only has a negative effect on the centrifuge operating system that was used by the Iranian nuclear facility at the time.
That's so bananas. Okay, so how deep does a rabbit hole go? Like, there's like a whole battle being fought. Ray Dalio talks about the 5 types of war. One of them is technological. How deep is that war?
The espionage war or the technological war?
The espionage war.
So let's start with the espionage war, because this is a point that I love making that not everybody understands, right? 2016, the election where Trump became president, it became mainstream news that the Russians were suspected to be interfering with the election. And the world went crazy, right? The American people went bananas. FBI, Secret Service, Facebook had to change their algorithms. Twitter was on the chopping block for contributing to Russian covert influence operations, right? You remember.
Oh, yes.
Why the hell do we think 2016 was the first time that happened? Why would we think that? Because we caught them in 2016? I mean, if we caught them in 2016, how many elections did they influence successfully before that where we never caught them? And that's just one country. What about China? What about France? What about Israel? What about Germany? What about Brazil? What about India? I mean, there's as many countries out there. There's 64, I think, countries right now. Every one of them has something to gain by influencing the outcome of the American election. Why would we think that nothing ever happened prior to 2016? Why would we think that the presidents we've elected, even in just yours and mine timeline, why do we think Bush was chosen by the American people? Why do we think Obama was chosen by the American people? Why do we think these people came to power of their own independent, uninfluenced, no foreign activity, hard work? It's probability-wise, it's extremely improbable. Like it's improbable that these people came to power and there wasn't also some country engaging in covert influence that was contributing to the outcome of the election.
Jesus.
That's how deep it goes. It's silly for us to think that just because we see it, that means that it started then. It's like seeing a roach in your apartment, right? If you see a roach in your apartment, that's not the only roach. The walls are disgusting with roaches, right? We saw it in 2016. That means it's been there for a long, long time. Why do we think George Washington became the first president of the United States? Because he earned it and the American people voted for him? France was the reason we won the American Revolution. You don't think that had something to do with, you don't think France had a say in who became the leader of the new United States? Now, I'm not saying that all of our presidents have been given to us by foreign powers. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am,
they're part of the equation.
It's a part of the equation. And you can't ignore that part of the equation, right? So now we have our entire political system is constantly embroiled in some sort of battle with espionage. And that's just our political system. Our DOD, I don't know how much you keep up with espionage news. Russia has penetrated the Army's medical corps. 2 Army officers were arrested just 3 months ago.
Whoa.
Recruited spies, recruited by the Russians. Yeah. We've had nuclear naval engineers recruited by the Chinese who have also been arrested in the last 3 to 4 months.
I heard about that one.
Like, we are heavily penetrated, heavily targeted, heavily penetrated by all the services in the world. And there's a famous quote out there in the world of foreign policy that says there are no permanent friends or enemies, just permanent interests.
Whoa, that's good.
So why do we think anybody is a friend? Why do we think an ally is a friend? If you recall, there was a major issue, I think it was 2010, maybe 2011, where the German chancellor was notified that the American NSA was spying on the Germans.
Whoa. We
have had people go to jail from our Navy who were recruited and working as spies for the Israelis.
What?
Like, this history tells you the story. It's just that nobody really spends time researching espionage history. So we have to understand how laughably predictable are human beings. We are so laughably predictable that you and I can predict that people aren't even aware that arrests are happening every few months of spies in the United States, in the military, in politics, right? In the Department of State, in the Department of Commerce, in the White House. Like, it's not surprising unless you let yourself be surprised, which, again, it's a predictable human thing to just, if we don't know about it, then it must not exist. And then it's also predictably human to assume that a friend is a friend. There are no permanent friends, right? There are people from my life, 13 to 25, that are not my friend anymore because our interests diverged. And that's normal and that's natural. And it's also normal and natural to feel pain when you outgrow somebody or when you have to leave somebody behind because your interests have diverged. And the saddest thing to me is the people who, when they feel that pain, when they feel that dissonance of leaving behind something from the past, they instead choose to give up on the ambition and double down on the anchor.
Yeah, getting trapped by, these are my friends, I don't want to leave them behind. That's crazy. I don't want to get off this topic, though. This is never in a million years did I think that this kind of thing would interest me, but also never in a million years did I think that we'd be living through a transitional moment where the U.S. is a declining superpower against a rising superpower in China. That as of the recording of this, the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are making moves to create their own currency to stop trading in U.S. dollar. Yep. So the dollar hegemony it's been under attack for a very, very, very long time. So I don't want to make this a headline that people panic about, but it certainly does feel like there's a lot happening right now that is super unnerving. And if it's got my attention, which this is really something that I'm slow to react to, but if it's got my attention, I think that it's reaching a certain level. Now, it could just be social media makes things like this visible to even me. But everybody I talk to, Ray Dalio, who I pay very, very close attention to, for people that don't know him, he just recently sort of retired, the largest hedge fund in the world. So nobody's made more money off of being right about what's happening in geopolitics than this guy. And he's like, yeah, we're at the 4 types. There's 5 types of war that I mentioned earlier. We're in 4 of them with China already. The only one we're not in is an actual hot war where people are shooting guns. What's your take on the global stability right now?
So unfortunately, I would say that the world, the globe, is fairly stable. The question is, what's the foundation of that stability? The foundation for the stability of the world for a long time has been the United States. We are seeing that transition, just like you said, right? It's that place where you slide the pizza off the pizza pan and onto the cutting board, right? We've been the pizza pan for a long time, and now it's sliding to someone else. The pizza's still very stable, but what's the platform? What's the foundation? I am always optimistic that the United States will recover. It will change its ways, will find a way to reunify the incredible polarity that we're in right now and get focused on the one true goal, American primacy.
Do you think that's possible in a world where I know, just saying American primacy, it like puts you at risk of being canceled? Like people just, there is a contingent. I won't even say how big it is, but they're fucking loud. There is a contingent of people, and it could be large, that's offensive.
I understand it. I do. I understand it. And that's okay. I hope that doesn't happen on your show, right?
You'll get some of it, to be sure.
No, I'm not worried about it happening to me. I just hope nobody cancels your show.
But too rich for that.
But the truth is, American survival is not being threatened. We don't have an existential threat to the United States. Existential threats are the threats that make people move. We talk about existential threats. More likely, other countries talk about existential threats. And what is an existential threat? A true existential threat is a threat that challenges your very existence. The existence of the United States is contingent upon the existence of the United States government, not Americans. Like we sometimes think that Americans make the United States. The United States is a representative republic government that has never existed before that now exists. So if that government falls or if that government cracks or breaks, all the people will still be here, right? But America will be gone. So the existential threat to the United States is the one that would trigger Americans to react. Now, we've come close to those moments. 9/11 is one of those times. When all Americans...
That felt awesome for a hot minute. It felt so good. The unity, yeah.
Yeah, all of a sudden, all of our differences melted away, right? The same thing happened at Pearl Harbor. All of our differences melted away because we had a common enemy. And we could individually see the existential threat posed to our country and our livelihood. Since 9/11, we have not had that kind of a threat. Countries around us have woken up to the fact, just like Emperor Hirohito in World War II said, "I fear we have woke a sleeping dragon." Our enemies have learned that Americans are slow to react. But when they react in full force. There's no way a savvy, intelligent, superpower competitor, GPC, global power competitor, is going to trigger an existential threat to the United States. Because they know that as long as they basically let us segment ourselves separately, as long as we insulate ourselves separately, we're going to eat ourselves to death with our own stupid little bitter squabbles about American primacy, right? Or about woke culture, or about representation, or about who knows what. We're going to just waste our time bickering in our little room, and we're not going to wake up to what's happening in the entire building. That's the strategy of the future.
Is to keep us divided.
It's not to keep, an influence campaign is always cheaper, easier, and and has a higher probability of success than a military campaign. So an influence campaign is basically like, hey, don't forget that you have race issues. Hey, don't forget that there's a socioeconomic divide. Hey, don't forget that the South tried to secede from the Union one. They're just picking, they're just poking and throwing salt on a wound. And then we are fighting over it. Right? And we fill our days worrying about this garbage, blind to what's happening on the larger scale, blind to the fact that the fantastic example is the global war on terrorism. The United States led the global war on terrorism following 9/11, right? And it felt good for a hot minute, like you said. We were all on the same page and we were all in this fight. And then that fight lasted 10 years. And then that fight lasted 20 years.
Also, it became so dodgy. If we had just been relentless about Osama bin Laden, when I heard how we caught him in the size of a shadow, I don't know if that's true, but it sounded dope. And I was just like, dude, we're ninjas. This is amazing.
Yeah.
But that was after a lot of, and look, I'm not super engaged in this stuff, so I'm definitely popping off ignorantly, but it did not feel good as a casual observer where we ended up going and how we ended up fighting and all that. And it just seemed like, wait, what are we doing?
Right.
So that felt like a squandered opportunity.
Well, during those 20 years, while we were mastering the art of hunting terrorism, hunting terrorists in mountains in Pakistan and Afghanistan, what were our global power competitors doing? Was Russia engaged in the global war on terror? Was China involved in the global war on terror? So all the hundreds of billions of dollars that we spent in that war, we spent in a war that was a giant distraction for us that gave our closest near-peer competitors 20 years to invest their money and grow to become a larger threat than we were even aware they were becoming, right? And then China, all of a sudden, China has multiple aircraft carriers and they're launching aircraft from aircraft carriers and they can project power into the South Asian seas. That's insane, right? All of a sudden, the Russian Federation is in close relationships with the Chinese and the Syrians and the North Koreans and the Iranians. How do we just wake up to this? Right? And that's what happens. It happens because we are still an adolescent country. So we get very myopic and we become very focused on the thing that we're playing with right now. And we lose the larger sight, the larger vision. The world has watched us do this for too long, and they don't make the same mistake twice, especially not authoritarian countries, because authoritarian countries have the benefit of authoritarian rulers that sit in an office or sit in a place, in a chair, for 15, 20, 30 years, right? They don't deal with the kind of tumult and transition that we have in the United States. I believe our constant change of leadership is part of what makes us strong, but we haven't yet learned how to have a change in leadership without a change in focus. That's what we haven't quite learned to do yet. So we're giving our authoritarian enemies an opportunity to have focus for a long period of time against us, while we don't have that against them.
I am a little worried about what's going to happen in 2024. I won't lie. If it ends up being a Trump-Biden runoff, what do you think happens, especially if Trump wins?
I think that if you're not preparing for that eventuality, it would be wise to prepare for that eventuality. The highest two probabilities are that either Trump wins the presidency or Biden wins the presidency. So just speaking practically again, mentally, as a business owner, as a father, as a husband, I'm preparing for one of these two things. There's a 90% chance that one of these two things is going to happen. So let me be ready for that. And then the last 10%, I'll let surprise me. Right? But I mean, who knows? It's difficult. It's also important to understand that we all focus on the president. The president, what powers the president has are granted to them by the legislative branch. We've gone through about a 30-year period where our legislative branch has been giving more power to the executive branch, specifically because the legislative branch is trying to cover their own ass. They want to be lifetime legislators. They don't want to be responsible for the people, and they don't want to be accountable to the people. So instead, they want to be able to say, you voted me into office, and the president doesn't let me do my job because I gave him all of my authority. So part of what we need to do is see the legislative branch take back the power from the president, which they can do with a vote. The president doesn't need to give them power back. They can take power back, but they do need to give the president power. He can't take power from the legislative branch. So in both cases, whether it's Biden or whether it's Trump, the real impact there is just how the world sees the United States. And then the fact that both presidents have the right to build their cabinet however they choose to build their cabinet. So they both are going to bring in their cronies. They're both going to bring in their yes people. They're both going to bring in people who are biased towards their own political futures. Nobody really at the top is thinking about what's in the best interest of the American people, because we've created this self-licking ice cream cone where politics is about rewarding the politician with politics instead of there's no incentive to serve the American people, especially not when the American people are split like we're split right now. So it's tough, man. It's tough. And I will say that what my wife and I keep an eye on is it's less about whether or not Donald Trump becomes president, and it's more about how will individuals exercise their legal powers? How will individuals exercise their civic responsibilities when the outcome is announced?
That's a fancy way of saying something.
Yeah. Will they revolt?
There we go.
Or will they go to the fucking table and vote every 2 years on the lowest levels of government so that you can actually affect a change in the government? Like it breaks my heart when I see Americans bitch, complain, and picket, let alone when I see them shoot and raid and invade, right? All of that stuff is something that we should be past. What we should be doing now is exercising our civic rights, our civic duties, our civic powers, because we have the power to affect everything up the chain if we just exercise it, if we're willing to let things slow down, and if we're willing to cut out some of the volume and actually do things the way that has always made America great. We've always been stronger because we have a bureaucratic process that allows us to slow things down, allows us all the time and the space to learn and ingest and accept and internalize what we believe to be true. When we move at lightning speed, we can be duped, we can be confused, we can be tricked. Let ourselves slow down. Embrace the fact that we slow down. If we didn't slow down, we'd be fucking China. An authoritarian rule where literally things change at the drop of one person's public announcement. We don't want that. We don't want that. We want something different.
Yeah. I mean, I'm 100% on board with that. So as you look at this with your analyst eyes, what do you think will be the reaction to, let's say, a Trump getting elected? Because my concern is when watching the Sam Harris thing happen on the internet, I don't know how closely you paid attention to that, but basically the entire internet turned on what I think is one of the smartest, most thoughtful people. I think he's wrong, but to your point about you want to triangulate anyway, you're not just going to listen to one person. Sam is right about so many things. But I believe I understand Sam maybe better than a lot of people in that the thing that Sam believes is that Donald Trump is an existential threat. And when someone becomes an existential threat, meaning it could wipe out humanity, I want to be very clear about what an existential threat is, that it's a whole new set of rules, baby. And you do whatever you have to do. And that if Sam, who is incredibly smart and extremely thoughtful, and I think a hyper moral person, but I also think he's wrong about this. So my thing is, okay, I think the real problem we have is we don't agree on what constitutes an existential threat. I actually don't know that we disagree about what to do in the face of a true existential threat. But like when I look at Trump getting elected, I'm like, please, Jesus, no. But at the same time, I don't see it as an existential threat. So, and I look at like, we had 4 years with him. The world didn't end, everybody. Like, but at the same time, other people look at it and like, bro, we dodged a nuclear weapon. Like, what are you talking? Like, it could be the end of humanity if he gets elected again. That freaks me out. The fact that people think, hey, him getting elected could end the world. Now, if this were like fringe crazies, I'd be like, whatever.
Yeah.
This is coming from some of the smartest people I know that they're very good at thinking through problems. So of course, part of me goes, is he an existential threat? Like, I don't think I'm the arbiter, right? So I'm Captain Distrust Yourself. But so the only thing I'm saying is when I analyze the situation, there are enough people that believe that he is an actual existential threat that if he gets elected, I think you have a problem. I don't think, look, I'm a big believer that America's freakishly resilient. I don't think it collapses. But do I think that at a minimum, we take another step towards a civil war? Yes, I really do. That one really freaks me out. Like I can buy into the proxy wars that World War III is going to be fought very surreptitiously. There won't be as much hot to the war. Okay, don't love it. Still very high stakes, still makes me very tense, but that's a lot better than say a World War II. But dude, in the summer of 2020, I sat on my balcony and watched LA burn. And that wasn't even around existential threats, right? So yeah, I don't know. And I don't know what's worse. And again, I'll ask you with your CIA analyst hat on, what's worse, Trump getting elected or Trump not getting elected?
So I'll start by saying that I disagree with all the smart people that you're referencing right now. And I would gladly...
Who think he's an existential threat?
Yes, I would gladly sit in front of anybody who believes that Trump is an existential threat and have a healthy debate on any topic they want to talk about. Because I have actually seen existential threats, and Trump is not that.
Can you paint an existential threat picture?
An existential threat is imminent. It means that it is the last step before the holistic destruction, the existence, destroying from existence the target that it is threatening, right? So let's consider a battleship, right? A hypersonic cruise missile will destroy a battleship, right? It is not an existential threat to the battleship. Even though it will destroy the battleship, it is not an existential threat to the battleship because if even one soldier survives, the memory of that battleship in current memory still exists. Not to mention all of the documentation about the battleship existing, and then they rebuild a new one, they give it the same moniker, and it's right back in service again, right? It is a perilous threat. It is not an existential threat. Truly existential threats are things that will wipe you off the face of the earth, right? Iran wants to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. That is an existential threat. And when they say that, when they announced that, they were talking about Israel, the state, and Jews. They want to destroy them. Nazi Germany posed an existential threat to the Jewish faith. Literally a systematic commitment to destroying an entire generation, like the entire existence of it forever, taking it off the world stage forever. That is an existential threat. What happens is that we have become spoiled in our terminology. Catastrophizing has become so common that now to get people emotional, to get people to move on their beliefs, you have to ramp everything up. To get past the volume and the velocity of data, you have to say the next most extreme thing. When you say the most extreme thing long enough, if you call yourself stupid enough times, guess what you start to believe? You start to believe you're stupid.
Right.
So when you tell people enough times, it's an existential threat, it's an existential threat, it's an existential threat, you start to actually believe, wow, maybe it really is an existential threat, without stopping to think, in one presidency, no president, Trump or anybody, no president can disband two of the three branches. The only thing the president can really do is write an executive order about the executive branch. If our Congress exists, we exist. If our judicial branch exists, we exist, right? And the other two branches are there to keep the executive branch in power. So one 4-year presidency, one 8-year presidency, two 8-year presidencies with President Trump is not, with a future President Trump, is not going to be the end of America. Could it do significant damage? Absolutely. But it's not an existential threat. It just isn't. It doesn't threaten to end the United States. It threatens to make life difficult, but lots of things threaten to make life difficult. We can't guarantee that Trump comes into office and somehow everything changes for the better. Who knows? We don't actually know. There's a term that we use in intelligence operations called the cone of uncertainty. And if you imagine like a funnel or a cone or a pennant, whatever, it's a certain shape. The timeline of known reality goes right up to the beginning of the cone. And then where you see the actual cone, that becomes an area of predictable confidence that you can guess within. But where that cone ends, everything past the cone is totally unpredictable. You have no confidence about what will happen one way or the other. So unless there is an existential threat, threatening the existence and future existence of something within that cone, then you can't really take it as a level of confidence one way or the other. So my recommendation to those people catastrophizing and everybody who's feeling that pressure, that anxiety, have a plan for when Donald Trump is announced as the winner of the presidency. Have a plan for it. Hope and vote against it all you want, but don't let it happen without a plan for what to do next. We have a plan for what to do next. Our plan takes us out of the United States. If Donald Trump becomes the president and our country takes a turn for the worse, we're leaving the United States. We already have the plan. If Joseph Biden wins the presidency and the United States takes a turn for the worse, we're leaving the United States. That's our plan. Doesn't mean that we're not proud to be Americans. It just means that where we are in our lives, with our children, with our business, with what we're trying to do in our personal mission, it is not to fix the United States right now. We'll let other people who are passionate about that fix the United States right now. We're going to go grow our family and take care of our family, grow our business, grow our impact, pay our taxes, and make sure the United States has the resources it needs to get through its adolescence. But other people are very dedicated to being part of the solution right now. And I applaud those people, and I want to give them the resources they need to be that level of impact.
It's interesting when you said earlier that you really believed in the supremacy of the U.S. I knew that you planned to leave. I thought it was a longer timeline than that. That's very interesting. So that tells me that you think that, well, let me not put words in your mouth. Are you saying that if one of those two gets elected, that there is a distressingly high probability of a bad turn?
Yes, I would agree with that statement completely.
Okay.
Regardless of which two, we're picking between two bad options. And that's just where we are right now. Unfortunately, I think there are good options on the table.
Who?
One of the options that I would actually personally love to see take the presidency is Nikki Haley.
I don't even know who that is.
And
I hear
and that's why she's
name.
not going to win.
So I hear her name all the time. I'm going to have to watch something. I don't
Yeah.
know what she looks like. Never heard her voice.
I
Literally no
think
idea.
of all the things that the country could really benefit from right now, it's a female, level-headed centrist. And even though she runs on the Republican ticket, she is very much her narrative is a very centrist narrative. And I really like the idea of our country kind of coming out of this 8-year disaster by showing that one of the things that makes us so powerful is our diversity. And I think we are at a time now where a strong female leader would be welcomed here. Unfortunately, I think that Hillary Clinton, in many of the years that she was running, wasn't the right fit at the right time. I think Nikki Haley might be different than that, but that doesn't mean she's got any traction. That doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it is one of those 10% outcomes where all of a sudden I see like sunlight instead of more rain and snow.
Did she run last cycle?
Now it's the first time she's run. And unfortunately she's showing a lot of the neophyte,
Making classic mistakes.
Yeah. Arguing over petty stuff and debates and blah, 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 blah. And not really showing that she's above all that. And to be president, you've got to be above all that frivolity.
Right.
Either you've got to do the Obama approach and just not address it, or you've got to do the Trump approach and address it jovially and make light of it.
Jovially.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. I got the best words.
Right.
I've got the best words. I'm the
No
best.
one's ever had words this good. I cannot do an impression to save my life. But yeah, the way he talks is hilarious.
Yeah.
Okay, what do you think of Vivek Ramaswamy?
I wanted to like Vivek a lot.
But you don't.
I wanted to like him a lot. I still think that he's made so many positive impressions on me, but at the same time, he's not been consistent in terms of the positive impressions, right? Picking fights with Nikki Haley over silly things like TikTok and personal attacks on her family. Come on, man. You've got to act presidential. I loved when he came out of the gates. He's prepared. He's a minority. He's young. So many things there that anybody could rally behind and love. But then there's these behavioral challenges where you're like, dude, the last thing I want to do is have you be negotiating with the Prince of Saudi Arabia and you're going to jab him on one of his wives. Like, no, that's not a good idea for us. No, thank you. Right. Again, neophyte beginner kind of error that he's going to try to fix up. But that's where we are right now. And again, going back to the original question, there is a very solid chance that a Trump or a Biden presidency is going to change its course, even 15 or 30 degrees, change its course, focus on American needs, focus on American economy, maybe even apologize for bad calls in the past. Who knows?
Good luck with that one.
But they can change the course and make significant benefits. But if they stay their course, then it's just more pain for all of us. And we can't stand by idly and let that happen. The pyramid, the civilization pyramid is not worth just sitting by and being silent. We have a chance to impact our state. We should.
For a deep dive on the global economy, check out my conversation with Balaji Srinivasan.
The problems go all the way to the bedrock of the financial system in terms of treasuries being the new toxic waste. It's going to be at least as bad as 2008, but probably worse than that.